Right. So now I will tell you a couple of words about the other subject that I lecture the group, the international students about at the SHU University, at the Wyższa Szkoła Handlu i Usług, at the Higher School of Trade and Services. Right. So the other thing is about economic geography. It sounds similarly, but it's something different because it had to be about geography, of course, about the geographical features of particular countries. I use usually several case studies. We came through. I presented eight. Generally, I presented eight case studies. So USA, China, Russia, the Netherlands, Italy, France, Spain, and UK. So you see countries that differ in size and history and culture and so on. I chose that because I can, compare them more easily. And sometimes they are like brothers, but with some small difference. So the the economic geography is what it's all about. It's about the relation between the geographical features of a particular nation and the policies, economic policies in the past and today of that nation. So, for instance, so some of the geographical features are, of course, the hugely advantages for the history of trade and production in some countries, right? For instance, it's better to have a rich coastline than to have not so much of a coastline, right? For instance, if you have a natural harbors, for instance, that would be hugely helpful, right? If you have, for instance, like something like a Stockholm archipelago, prawda? Yeah, it's really helpful. If you have something like canals of Amsterdam or some, it doesn't really matter if it's totally natural or partly artificial. You have to, if you have elaborated coastline, that will help you. Right, but those are just first example from the top of my head. But for instance, going directly to the case studies, the first case study is USA, and USA is, of course, a superpower, maybe the only superpower on the whole face of the of Earth today. But why exactly is the United States such a superpower? It became a superpower when it got the access to the not so much California and those places, rather to places like the Great Plains. Those are the regions of maybe not so flashy when it comes to the states which are located in that area of Great Plains. Well, North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, and Ohio even. They don't maybe sound interesting, but from the economic point of view, they are very interesting because that whole region from Montana to Iowa, really, it's basically the Great Plains to almost all that region. Of course, we must to have a little simplification for the sake of time and so on. So this is the biggest portion of good arable land on the face of our planet. Of course, you can imagine better soil, the soil of better quality somewhere on Earth. For instance, the soil in the Dutch polders is very good quality. The same with Charnozem of the Ukraine and so on. But if you have like a big chunk of good arable land, just very decent, maybe not top arable land, but very decent arable land, and much about of it, then you think about Great Plains of the United States, or the southern China region, which could be all, enriched with rice cultivation and so on. Or the second one after the American one, which is, the northern central India, when you have also a big chunk of arable land. For instance, there are many countries in which they don't have so much of it, really. For instance, in Italy, it's just the northern Pad Valley that it would be all, basically. But we will get to Italy in a while. All right, so USA, when you learn about the American Revolution, about the American Revolutionary War, you usually think about ideological stuff like democracy and liberalism versus the government of the constitutional monarchy of England, about the taxes, about things like that. Most people don't remember that the things that made the American colonists, the American British people, really so cross. They were of different origins, of course. Many colonies were, established in many ways. For instance, right, you have Pennsylvania, which was a private colony of a religious cult of the Quakers. You have a private colony of Colonel James Oglethorpe. That would be the colony of Georgia. But you had also state governed and state ruled colonies founded by some trade companies which were directly linked to the governments. That would be Nya Sverige, the Delaware, or New Amsterdam, the New York City region and colony later on. So different histories here, but some private, some state-owned, and so on, and some not even English, but after some time English conquered by the English, by the British, and English and then British. So but those colonies have a common goal, which was to make settlements across the Appalachians, and they were prohibited from doing it because the British wanted peace with the Indians, with the Native Americans. So the Americans, they could not establish settlements on the other side of the Appalachian Mountains. They also were prohibited from having large-scale manufacturing industry. So the Americans were expected to buy, first and foremost, British goods and just sell crops and agricultural stuff to the British. And the Americans disliked it very much because the thing that would make America great again, America great in the first place, was that every small neglected person from Europe that didn't have it their way in Europe could go to the United States, or to British America even before, and they were given almost free land, almost no payment at all, almost. So when the number of British Americans already reached like 4 million, they were thinking very much about the new terrains across the Appalachians, but they were no touchy because of the Indians. So the Americans were very much oriented on those geographical features and this geographical interest as well. And we always forget somehow about it. So when the Americans got to the region of this very good arable land of the Great Plains, where they already got rid of the British, and the British they had to conquer Bengal and Australia instead, and new economic ideas emerged and so on. They also changed their way of thinking about freedom, because to not help cases like those who were helpful to the Americans and so on. So they were not okay. That is another topic. But the British were very much started to dislike very much the idea of social contract, because it helped the American cause. So they changed to more how's this fancy word, positivistic approach, that all law is made by men and just utilitarian, right? So no natural law ideology anymore. But the Americans, they got rid of the British. They got a grip of the Great Plains, the best arable land on the face of the planet. They had as much new, practically free land, very good one, to all the newcomers from Europe, and for the entire 19th century they were growing and growing. Why the British were so much against the settlements across the Appalachians? But maybe they were thinking that America is growing too fast and they wanted to slow it down a little bit. So of course, if you add to that the distance from America to Britain, then you have to. It was 1 month long journey from Britain to America back then. So the communication were not really functioning very good. So maybe if they had internet, or maybe at least telegraph, which were invented, or steamboats, which were invented, steam engine applied to the ships, where it was invented by an American, Thomas Fulton, at the beginning of the 19th century, and telegraph was invented by the Germans a little bit later. So had they had it, maybe the communication would be better, and they would still be part of Britain. But given those limitations in communication, so it's also a geographical feature, right? They were unable to get any form of a compromise that would be acceptable by both sides. So America got this grip of the Great Plains and the system of the two gigantic rivers of Mississippi and Missouri, and the USA started to be really great power from this moment on. So it was like a path for greatness, which was also forbidden fruit by Britain. China is another story. China, when you put a map of China, China is in size similar to the United States. But when it comes to arable land, you must remember that you have basically just only 1/3 of this country, which would be a small particle of the northern part and the big particle of the southern part. The southern part of China, the southeastern part of China, is traditionally the region when rice is being produced on the mass scale. And when you consider the number of the square kilometers of crops and cultivation, then if you put the seeds of rice, then you will have 3 times as much food, or food for 3 times as much people than you would have with, let's say, wheat or another more European type cultivations. So that's why there are so many Chinese, although only 1/3 of the country is really inhabitable to a huge extent for a huge number of people and so on. Whereas that not just Tibetan and Xinjiang regions are very much hostile to any life, basically, but even the adjacent regions which are in the middle between the best one third, the coastal one third, and the Xinjiang and Tibet. Those are also places which are blocked from the normal humidity and other benign weather factors by the Himalaya mountains. So China has many disadvantages when it comes to geography. Very many when you consider that they also have an interesting coastline and the access to world ocean and so on, but the land size, it's not really saying much about the advantages that are in some in geography, right? So so China was always focused on China is always focused on making agriculture better and better because of the large population. Already in 17th century, China's population was, of course, not nearly as big as today, but in proportion to the European population, very similar to today's proportion. So they were very much focused on the new agricultural techniques, and they were not thinking so much about international trade, exactly for this reason, because it was hard to squeeze much food from this one third of a country. Although, of course, we must remember that China was not always as big, like 100% as big, but it was well, for most of its history, it was almost as big as today. Well, maybe not most, but large part. Okay, Russia. Russia, when I was lecturing about Russia, this case study, a Russian case study, it's a funny thing because Russia is even has it's screwed even more than China, because most of Russia's territory is basically inhabitable. Only people who like to make their life a constant adventure of pain and challenge like that. Only people who are miners or something and they are working in this monocultural miner cities of the north are satisfied in there. So one would think that maybe you would have to wait to the railroads to be constructed in the 1880s to conquer the Siberian lands, but it was not the case because you have the wonderful river system. The wonderful river system on the other side of the Ural Mountains. You have, of course, the gigantic rivers of Ob, Yenisei, and Lena, which are not directly connected because they are going basically vertically, but they are, supporting river systems. They are connected horizontally on the map. So they were provided the net of the transporting net for the colonization. So already at the end of the 16th century, Russia was, halfway through Siberia, which is, I think, something, right? And at the end of the 17th century, they were already establishing, settlements on the Pacific coast. For instance, they were establishing the city of Vladivostok. That means the ruler of the East, right? So they made it all without railroads because the rivers made it possible. So you see that if the rivers were functioning in this similar way, if the river systems of Ob, Yenisei, and Lena were not connected, the colonization of Russia would probably not have taken place, and because those regions would be not so very accessible by any power. or maybe they would be accessible by some other power like Japan, for instance, or China. So you can see how big factor a geography is, and Russia is blessed with their rivers, but Russia is cursed when it comes to seas. Most of the seas are Arctic, really, and it was Peter the Great who, through wars and blackmailing, got the access to the international waters that would unlike the Arctic Ocean and the Arctic Sea and things like that, would not be frozen for many months every year. So Russia probably has this whole idea of being surrounded all the time, because they were very conveniently shaped within, but very inconveniently shaped when it comes to the access to the global systems of seas and oceans. Right, so the Netherlands, Batavian non deus sed Bataus fecit, right? So the Holland was made by the Dutchmen, not the Dutch country was made by the Dutchmen, not by God. They have almost 1/5 of the country got from the sea. Those lands are called the polders. Already at the end of the 16th century, those very good arable lands were already at their full disposal, and they made their country already at the end of the 16th century independent practically when it comes to agriculture and food. So, and that's something when you consider how smallish a Dutch territory was, and how relatively big was and is the population. So the Netherlands, because of the limitations for agriculture, had to import first in the first half of the 16th century. They had to import most of the food and so on, but already at the end of the 16th century, the situation totally changed. So, of course, Holland had to focus on trade, but then they focused on their economic independence. So this is basically why they are so experimental, engineering and so on, this approach to life, right? The Italians also, as I already mentioned in the previous films, they contributed to the international systems of banking and trade, free market ideology and so on, because they are pretty much living along the coastlines and in the valley of Pad in the north, or the small, I don't remember how it's called, this small hill of the Italian boot. It's, I think, Apulia. It's the region of Apulia. Yeah. So they... so I mentioned all that, right? That Italy is also not like the Netherlands. It's also very much limited when it comes to the possibilities, natural resources, and other obstacles. So hence, first and foremost, they were basing on trade, and Italians were also migrating in great numbers in the 19th century to America, Argentina, Brazil, and so on, because there was too many people. And Italy, unlike the Netherlands, a big nation, Italians, they could not really subsist themselves when it comes to food and agriculture. So especially in the south, because it's like 12 as much migrants were coming from the south and from the north in the 19th century to America and places like that. So Italy is because the main force that stood behind the unification of Italy, the Unità d'Italia, was the Piedmont Savoy, and that's the country in the north west of Italy, and hence, although the first big manufacturers were constructed and established by the Bourbons in the Kingdom of Naples, they moved quickly after the unification process that started in the 1859 and was done in the 1870s, more or less in the same time, and the German unification, which was a shorter process, but well, was ended in the very basically in the same time. The Italians got all the industry move north, and that's why the South disliked and even hates the North even today, because they were those who were more often forced to migration and so on. Although the Italians sometimes don't remember that the North was always more advantageous because of the Pad Valley, the only big chunk of terrain that is very good for arable land, that it's stretching from the outskirts of the Kingdom of Savoy and Piedmonte to the Tuscany, including Tuscany, basically. That's probably why Tuscany is the cultural capital and center of Italy, and why the main version of Italian language is the Tuscan version. Okay, France have all those most important rivers concentrated in the middle. France has the rivers like Loire and Seine and Rodin. They go and meet, so to speak, in the middle of the country, and the additional river net is supporting these connections. So the French hexagon is naturally a centralized and centralizing power. And no, it's no difference if it's the age of Louis the 11th, of Louis the 14th, the Sun King, or the Le Roi Soleil or Napoleon. It's the same. So it's the country that the geography itself is dictating all this centralization, and also which makes France geography and then the connection between economy and geography, or demography and economy, very special and unique, is that that France possesses have two climate zones, really, one northern and one Mediterranean. The French even have this constant question of how much fleet or the navy should be stationing in the north or in the south. They are creating such a situation that they have 2/3 of the military navy in the south, because by having that 2/3 in the Mediterranean, they secure a situation in which the French navy is the strongest in the Mediterranean before the Italian, the Spanish, and the Turkish navies. And in the north, they would never be as powerful as the British, even if they sent everything there. So they constantly have to ask themselves if they are more northern or more southern Mediterranean people. If you think about Paris and even Bordeaux, you would think that it's more or less a northern nation. But you must remember that culturally, just as important are Lyon, Toulouse, and Marseille, which are all in the south. So it's hard to say if it's a country of Mediterranean climate and character and way of living, or maybe northern, like Germany or Holland or something. So this unique situation that not so big a country, although for Western Europe is the biggest country of Western Europe, but still not such a big a country, have two climate zones which are very distinctively different, creates a situation in which you could in France, you could lower the number of hours that were the working hours for individuals, workers, co-workers, and so on, and still be profitable, because those people would go. They don't need to go to another country to have something sort of a subtropical, maybe not subtropical, but very warm, benign climate. They can go just to the south of their own country. They create a situation in which if you give additional hours, additional vacation time to a French worker, he would go by the French train of train de grande vitesse, the TGV, to the south of France, and he will eat French bread, eat French food, and live in a French hotel. Whereas in England, they would just jump to the in the Irish, cheap airline flight, and they would go to Bulgaria or Spain. So no money returning to the French taxpayers and budget. So what works in France would never work in England, but it does not mean that French are lazy or something. It just means that France have 2 climate zones and England doesn't. All right, Spain. Spain is basically empty inside, and the situation was even more aggravated by the establishing of the Mesta organization in the I think it was already in the 14th century, but in the 15th century is going with all the speed. And there were the sheep, the merinos, who basically han comido la España. They basically ate Spain, and Spain is even more like a desert inside. The only 2 big cities inside of Spain, more in the middle, are the most elevated when it comes to sea level, above sea level ground, most elevated capital city of Europe. That would be, of course, Madrid, and the other not so very big city of Zaragoza. But the other big cities like Valencia, Murcia, Barcelona, and so on, they are more close to the shore. And it doesn't matter if it's the northern shore, the Atlantic shore, or the Mediterranean shore. So Spain is naturally driven to go to invest in autonomous region, to decentralization, to having many cultures, local cultures. They have local cultures and languages, and they are flourishing all the time. And it's also this type of distribution of people that would make the descubrimientos, the age of discoveries, easier for all those Fernando de Magellaus and the other. Right, so United Kingdom. United Kingdom is like the Netherlands, a little bit of a country that is a little bit artificial. I mean, in a very positive way. So non Deus sed bataus fecit. The same would to be more maybe to some smaller extent said about England, because it's basically England, right? Do not kid ourselves that Scotland matters anything. Scotland is smallish in population, only on the map looks, serious. But in the 18th century, in the 1707, Scotland had maybe 3 million people. England had something like 9 million. So when you combine it, when you add those, you would have in 1707 12 million inhabitants. It just estimates because we don't know. They were not really very good, surprisingly, when it comes to statistics, or maybe not surprisingly, because the British were not really so much in favor of centralized government, thus not so much statistics as in Sweden or France. For instance, in France, in mid-18th century, the statistics were functioning pretty well, and the Swedes also had this system of Tabelverket in 1740s installed. By the British, they didn't have anything of the kind, and they were going basically a little bit libertarian. So we would say today, but you must remember that most of the governments of that age were provisory. Right, so in 1707, England had maybe 12 million inhabitants, even when we include the Scotsmen. The French were twice as numerous. But today, France and England are similar in size of population, in population size. So why is that? It's because the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution made the climate of northern England especially, and of Scotland to some extent also, the climate of Edinburgh and Glasgow, but first and foremost of Leeds, Manchester, Liverpool, and Sheffield, more benign, more accessible to human beings, to everyday life, which would be much more pleasant than before. And because of that, the population grew and grew and grew. The unprecedented scale of the Industrial Revolution, because the similar inventions were made in the other countries of Europe, in France, for instance, Pierre Cugnot, Vardia-Vepère, and so on, but or Vaucanson, they were not on this scale. So this scale, the new inventions, the new commodities, the new facilitations of life made Britain a big nation. So you have something like a country that is a little bit independent of their own geography. Geography is working against you because the climate is not so benign. Although, of course, England is in the first sphere of influence of Gulf Stream, so it's not very hostile environment, but still. So UK has basically two types of elite and two types of two ways of thinking. So it's not surprising that the Labour Party is representing first and foremost the north of England, and the Conservative Party is represented first and foremost the southern England, which has much more long history of prosperous economy than the north, and that this type of the southern economy is based historically more on trade and financial things than the north, which is based on first and foremost the very fact that Industrial Revolution happened. So you can see that how geography meant that especially the south will be developed and the north will be underdeveloped, and only the accident of the Industrial Revolution created a situation which contributed to a situation in which England is nothing like Sweden. The Sweden is a country that looks a little bit like England looked in 18th century. So very little number of people north, in the northern part, and almost everybody lives in the south. In England was maybe not such an it would not be so abject a phenomenon, but still much changed because of the Industrial Revolution. And so England basically turned into a very big nation, which never was before. It was more Poland size nation. So if there were no Industrial Revolution, it would mean that living in northern England and Scotland were not so comfortable, and probably England would not be such a populous state today. And it is so because, and it probably would be more like Poland size size of Poland when it comes to population, because it was, for all its history, England was far less, almost all its history, or her history, if we use the more emotional tone, her history, Britain was far less populous than Italy or Germany, if we treat those German and Italian states as one. When we put those together, France was for the last couple of hundreds of years a united nation, so we can compare with France, right? Today, France and England are almost identical in size of population, and well, it is a new phenomenon. So you can see that sometimes you can really challenge the geography to a very big extent, and especially the Netherlands and Britain are examples of that. Right, so I think I gave you a general idea what my lectures are all about. As you can see, economic geography is much more, much simpler lecture, much simpler subject, but it involves many particular information and facts. So I don't know which of those two series of lectures would be more challenging during the day of the exam, which would be on February the 11th, for both groups, because totally different two groups, totally different subjects for totally different groups. So right. So I think I gave you some idea about what some idea of what my lectures are about, and that was my task that I and because I summarize the material for the groups, I also made a summary of a summary, so to speak. Okay. To książka jest, dobra, I switch to Polish now. Książka jest w tej chwili, idzie niedługo do składu, więc no dostaniesz ją wtedy, kiedy będzie wydrukowana, a to będzie prawdopodobnie gdzieś tak połowa, może końcówka lutego. Zależy jak drukarnia będzie miała terminy. Dobra. See you later, alligator, i powodzenia wszelkiego. Mam nadzieję, że było interesujące. Trzymajcie się, powodzonka. Good night and good luck.